Hello, my name is Dick Hatwick. I'm president of the American National Business Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame is an organization of university professors from around the country. Our goal is to create an awareness and an understanding and an appreciation of America's rich heritage of ethical business success. And ethics is the topics of the program that you're about to follow. The two words business and ethics don't seem to go together in the minds of a lot of people. One reason for that is that the business press and the non-business press is always telling us about wrong things that business is doing, whether it's corporate crime or something that may not be illegal, but it is unethical. And so we have to try to untangle this bias towards negative reporting on business from the truth of the matter. To make things more complicated, most people don't have a clear understanding of how to frame the question, how ethical can business be? In the Hall of Fame, we found it helpful to use the framework provided by Will Durant, the famous philosopher historian, whose work is best approached in the beginning with this simple but powerful book, The Story of Philosophy. In The Story of Philosophy, Durant suggests that after you read all the world's philosophers through all time, what you find is basically three theories of proper behavior, three theories of ethics. One of those theories, and by far the lowest of them, is called the exploitation ethic. This is what the press seems to think business is all about. And there are these kinds of unethical businesses, but they're in a small minority of the cases that you'd look at. The more common ethic is the ethic of justice or fairness. Most businesses you deal with are businesses that practice fairness because that's the best way to motivate people to attract the customers and to make a profit. Now, the highest level of ethics is altruism. And there's some question whether or not you can possibly be altruistic in business and be successful. As we look at the case histories that are to follow, I will suggest that in some cases we may very well be looking at people who were altruistic in business and who were successful, in part because of their altruism. Remember that what I'm doing here in the beginning is trying to frame the issues with you, and so I'd like to turn to one other aspect of framing the issues, and that is the situation the business person finds themselves in and day out. Persons in business face ethical decisions at two levels. First, each business person has to choose the basic ethical system to which he or she will pledge allegiance. This is a choice among those three basic systems I just covered. Second, each person has to apply the chosen ethical system many times a day in ethical choice situations which present themselves, and nobody's going to be perfect all the time. We're all going to make mistakes. Most of the business leaders that I will be talking about as we continue recognize this problem of daily choice, and they all came up with some form of a code of ethics that would help them in making their daily decisions. One such code, which nicely captures the thinking of the people we'll be looking at, is the four-way test. This was devised by a Rotarian, Herbert Taylor. Herbert Taylor is one of our Hall of Fame laureates. Rotarians, Herbert Taylor among them, before they take a business action or say anything, ask themselves the four questions you see on the screen. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendship? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? If you do not have, for your personal use, a code of ethics that you use, not only in business, but in all aspects of your life, take a look at this four-way test. I think you will find it will help you make better decisions. Now, one of the things that our Hall of Fame laureates keep telling us is that business people, our laureates included, face ethical issues in their dealings with a small number of identical types of individuals. There are customers, there are employees, there are suppliers, there's the community at large, there's the stockholders, and there are the competitors. And what our Hall of Fame laureates have found is that it is helpful to think through what your ethical policies will be with respect to each of those groups. Let's take a look at some of the answers our laureates came up with for the first of those two groups, customers and employees. We won't have time to cover the others, but if you apply that four-way test that we looked at a minute ago, you can probably figure out what they would have done in each of those cases. We begin with the case of the customer. What is business's moral responsibility to the consumer? And as we go through the case studies of our many Hall of Fame laureates, some themes seem to stand out. Those themes are price, quality, refusal to deal, and communication. Let me take those in sequence here. Let's begin with price and a couple of stories illustrating the point about price. James Cash Penney is a wonderful example of an approach to ethics on price. We'd have to say that most business people have the ethic of charging a fair price. But Penney went the next step. He was a true altruist. His goal was to bring the lowest possible price to low-income Americans in the small town where he founded his company and then throughout the country. He started with the Golden Rule store. He was a Christian, a devout Christian, and he looked at his business as an opportunity to be providing Christian service to his customers, and the most important service he thought was to give them the lowest possible price. And so he opened the store that you see in the upper panel here and charged rock-bottom prices. So successful was that concept that customers from other towns asked him to start stores in their communities. And so he expanded, first in the rural West and then into the cities, eventually becoming a giant nationwide institution known for its low-price policy. In Illinois, a similar story, another great one representing, I think, the altruistic ethic. A farmer outside of Bloomington, Illinois, by the name of George Maherl, very successful, but at the age of 40 he decided to retire because of health problems his wife had. He thought he would stay retired, but he couldn't stay retired. He was a workaholic. He had to be doing something. And so he looked for a job as an employee. He got a job selling automobile insurance for a local insurance company. That's represented by the lower portion of this slide. As he went around the countryside selling insurance to farmers, he became aware of the fact that insurance, automobile insurance, charged to farmers was overpriced. He could see how the price could be cut, and more important, he thought it was only right that the price be cut. And so, unable to sell his employer on the concept of coming out with the low price policy, he ended up starting his own company, which came to be known as the State Farm Insurance Company. What it offered was unbelievably low prices for automobile insurance to originally only the farm clientele. He quickly discovered that people in the city were paying too much, and so he expanded to people in the city, at first only in Illinois, and then eventually nationwide. As his business continued to grow in the sale of automobile insurance, he became aware of opportunities to get prices down in fire insurance and then later in life insurance. And eventually State Farm Insurance became a business that offered low-price policies in all of these dimensions. Again, the original emphasis being an altruistic urge on the part of ex-farmer George Maherl. Finally, let's take a look at someone most persons viewing this video will be well familiar with, and that is Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. I would submit to you that if we look at his history, if you read his biography, you are going to see there an altruistic urge to offer the customer the lowest possible price and then to go out and find ways to make it even lower. During the time that Sam was operating that Walmart expansion, I think it's clear that this was one of the driving forces in explaining what he was doing. So, at least a fair price, and in some cases an altruistic approach to pricing, is what we see in our laureates. Let's turn to quality and the story of John Deere. Deere, as some of you will remember from your high school history books, was the inventor of the steel plow. You may recall that that invention was spurred by the complaint by farmers in the northern Illinois community where Deere lived that their iron plows wouldn't function very effectively, that the clay soil kept sticking to them, and somebody surely could invent a plow to which the soil did not stick. Maybe that person was Deere. Well, that person was John Deere. He invented the famous steel plow, which opened the Midwestern prairies, a replica of which hangs in the Smithsonian Institute today. Now, after the invention, there was the matter of starting a business to sell the plow, and John Deere entered into such a business. But he had a lot of copycat competitors, people who were probably violating his patent. And those competitors attempted to engage him in a price war. They cut their prices to gain customers from him. And in cutting their prices, they did what one often does in price wars. They cut the quality. You lower the price, you've got to lower the cost. John Deere would have none of that. Even if he was going to be put out of business, he was determined to only put on the market a quality product. I will never put on the market, he said, a product that does not have the best that is in me. And this approach to quality, sticking to quality even if it pushes the business to a position of being at risk, is common in our great quality success stories. Now, the refusal of John Deere to compete by lowering quality is an example of the notion of refusal to deal with the customer as an ethical imperative. You refuse to do things with the customer that you think is unethical. That issue is nicely illustrated by the story of Wayne Hummer, who you're looking at on the screen here. Mr. Hummer grew up in a prominent family in LaSalle, Peru, Illinois. After finishing an economics degree at Princeton, he came back and eventually became president of the family bank. In the 1920s, he began to be bothered by the fact that bond salesmen from Chicago and New York would come to his bank and would attempt to sell him securities, which he knew, because of his economics training, were bad investments. But yet, as he listened to the sales presentations of these salesmen, it was clear to him, that they were being unethical in their communications. And so in 1931, Wayne Hummer decided to do something about what he considered unethical behavior in the brokerage company business. He started a company called Wayne Hummer and Company. It was to be for banking customers only. It was to be a place where the bankers could make their investments without putting themselves at risk of being hit by unethical behavior by Wayne Hummer salesmen. Wayne Hummer did this by refusing to engage in some of the practices that were common in the industry. The most important one probably was the fact that salespersons in the industry were paid on a commission basis. You only earned money if you made a sale. Wayne Hummer changed that. He put his salespeople on a salary. That way they didn't have an incentive to give misleading information or even bad information to their customers. There were other techniques that Wayne Hummer avoided, refused to deal in, that were part of the industry and led to unethical behavior. We need not cover those now, because what we simply want to emphasize here is that Wayne Hummer represents two aspects of the ethical commandment of our laureates when it comes to the customer. With respect to communication, the ethical commandment is to be totally honest in what you're saying and thorough. Give full information. With respect to refusal to deal, the message is have the courage to refuse to deal in practices or even products which you recognize as being unethical. Let's move now to ethics and the employee. What did our Hall of Fame laureates have to say about moral responsibility and the workforce? Well, here too we have a short list of topics which seem to come up in case after case: wages and benefits, job security, happiness, and fulfillment. Let's take each of them briefly. In the case of wages and benefits, one of my favorite stories is the Wes Loomis story. I think it's a message for all time. Wes Loomis came from a family that was a part owner of the General Telephone Company, and the General Telephone Directory had a subsidiary that produced and sold telephone directories. It was called the Telephone Directory. Wes, in 1952, was called to Des Plaines, Illinois, to take over management of the directory company. It was losing money, and the owners wanted, the owning company, General Telephone, wanted to find out why it was losing money, sell it off if it couldn't be turned around, but turn around if it could be. And after Wes had taken a close look at what the problem was, it was clear to him what needed to be done. He called a meeting of the existing management at a retreat outside of Chicago, and to the assembled crowd he said, "Here is the way we're going to do things from here on out." The critical part of his message to the workforce had to do with the ethical approach to the employees. This had been a company which went out of its ways to keep pay to the sales force down. Wes wanted to turn that around, not only for the sales force, but for everybody in the organization. And what he told those assembled management folks is something that any manager today, or I'm sure in later years, would be well advised to pay attention to. What he said to his folks, management folks, was, our people are going to be treated better and paid better than is the case with any of our competitors. We will pay top dollar. In return, we expect our people to produce more than the competitors. Now, what is the message here? The message is that management has an ethical responsibility to pay their employees top dollar, but to make sure that the employees earn it, and that means that management has a responsibility to figure out how to structure jobs so that high pay can be earned. That's a tough assignment for management, but it can be done. And it was done by Wes, and the rest of the General Telephone Directory Company story is the amazing growth that took place with this new system. It really did work out. Now, much of what Wes did in terms of paying people for productivity was relatively easy in the sense that he had salespeople out there making sales, and you can measure how many sales they're making, can't you? What do you do in a situation where team production is the key to success, and you can't pay individual members of the team different rates or they'll be competing with one another? Well, D.J. Dupree of the Herman Miller Company came up with an answer which is common among our laureates, and I'd like to share that with you. D.J. took over management of the Herman Miller Company in the 1920s. It was a struggling company in Zeeland, Michigan that made furniture for homes primarily. D.J., as he looked at what was going on in the industry and why the company wasn't profitable, decided the problem was too much competition. What we need to do, he said, is to find a niche in which we can compete. And the niche he chose to compete in was office furniture, and within the office furniture business, high quality. And to make his product the highest quality in the industry, he decided that he would pay top dollar to hire furniture architects. And he did indeed pay so much money that he was actually able to lure architects from New York City to tiny Zeeland, Michigan, where the lure was not only the pay, but the fact that D.J. would produce the product they designed. Most manufacturers would take whatever the architect came up with and then modify it so that they could get production costs down. Not D.J. Well, this was a great technique. It did create a quality product. It did turn this into a very profitable company. And in the 30s and the 40s and into the 1950s, D.J. was able to feel good about the strategic choice that he had made. But in the early 1950s, something was bothering D.J. As he walked around and visited the craftsmen that were building the pieces of office furniture sold by Herman Miller, he was bothered by the fact that there was a team production element in in the way the company produced its furniture, and the individual craftsmen were being paid on their individual productivity, even though they were part of a team, and they were competing with one another a little bit. And he wanted to eliminate that competition and get them working as a team, and yet to have them motivated to be fully productive. What he did was to come up with a pay for productivity where the productivity rather, was measured on a team basis. The particular plan that he used is called the Scanlon Plan. There are probably 25 companies in the world using that plan in 2002, which is the time at which we're talking. That small number is using it because it's a very demanding program for management to carry out. Not many managements are willing to make that effort, but there are many other pay for team production plans around the world representing what D.J. had discovered, which is that productivity can be measured on a team basis and paid for, and that can be the way that your workforce becomes a highly paid workforce. We can't leave the Dupree story, the Herman Miller story, without mentioning that Max's two sons, who are also Hall of Fame laureates, first Hugh and then Max Dupree, the two sons carried that business to new heights. And son Max, who was also a bit of a philosopher, turned to writing up his experiences in several books, the first of which is the famous Leadership as an Art. If you're not familiar with these little gems about ethical business leadership, I commend them to you. Let's move on to the topic of lifetime employment, another area in which our Hall of Fame laureates felt that it was important for an ethical decision to be made, and their decisions, not totally, but in the great vast majority, were to offer something that we would call lifetime employment. None of them promised you had a job for life. All of them knew that the job was good only as long as the business was profitable in the long run, but all of them thought they had a moral obligation to hold on to their employees and find ways to keep the business profitable. Our first example here is one of my favorite stories, William Allen Pat Patterson, the famous builder of United Airlines between 1929 and 1965. It's worth taking a look at Pat's origin because I think this illustrates one of the ways in which people develop a strong ethical orientation. Pat was born on the tropic isle of Oahu, Hawaii. His father was a plantation manager, foreman who was killed in a machete fight, killed by one of the workers. His mother put him in an orphanage in Hawaii and moved to San Francisco, where she moved in with her sister. Pat managed to escape from the orphanage and stole aboard a schooner as a cabin boy, sailed to San Francisco, and showed up at his aunt's home. So aunt and mother took him in. They put him in grade school. Here we see Pat's grade school graduation picture. The mother wanted him to continue all the way through high school. It was clear that he was a bright boy, but Pat felt he had an obligation to help support the family, and so he answered a help wanted ad in the paper and became an office boy, a mailroom boy at the Wells Fargo Bank. And that could have been the end of what turned out to be a brilliant management career. It wasn't the end of the career because an older man, F.I. Raymond, spotted Patterson's potential, discovered that there was no father in the family, and decided to become the surrogate father. Raymond insisted, after talking with the mother and getting her to agree, that Patterson would continue his schooling at night, which Pat did. He finished high school at night and then went on to college. Raymond also helped get Patterson a job as an assistant loan manager. And in that capacity as an assistant loan manager, Patterson had an opportunity to make a loan to an airline. It was a small airline called Pacific Airline. How small? They had one airplane. And the loan was to pay for pulling that airplane out of San Francisco Bay. The owner and pilot of the airline had misjudged the landing strip. Well, the loan was made and the airplane was pulled out and service was resumed, but Patterson, studying the industry, became convinced that Pacific Air Transport couldn't make it in the long haul on its own, and he prevailed upon the owner of the company to sell his business with its rights to stop at different cities to a larger organization, the Boeing organization. Boeing had an airline subsidiary called United Airlines. Pacific Air Transport became part of United. Patterson was involved in those negotiations, and the folks at Boeing became familiar with him. They liked what they saw, and they invited him to become part of their own airline business. And so Patterson left the bank in San Francisco and became a manager at United Airlines in Seattle. Patterson distinguished himself as a manager by his terrific human relations skills. One of those skills was his ability to identify himself with, in the most sincerest of ways, the workforce. He was famous for going out into the workplace and meeting with the employees, whom he soon learned to call by their first name, and he insisted they call him by his first name. And when he later became president of an independent United Airlines, he continued this practice of walking around and meeting all of the employees. Boeing was forced to make United an independent company in 1935, and at that time Patterson became president of an independent company. He had already been managing the entire subsidiary of Boeing since 1929. Now let's take a look at this slide with Patterson walking about and ask the question, what kind of communication was taking place as Patterson went out to talk with these folks? Well, as he told us at the time of his retirement, he was trying to communicate to these people how important they were to the business. Whatever their job, he wanted them to know that they were appreciated and that it was important. And more important than showing the appreciation, he wanted them to know that they could count on the airline to back them up. As he tells us in his biography, If a company is worth being associated with, it must demonstrate its real interest in its people at a time when the chips appear to be down. And as Patterson was to tell us many times in our personal interviews with him, you know, professors, he would say, in my business we had an opportunity on a regular basis to prove how loyal we were, because this was a business of feast or famine. And for every period of time when we were making good money in the business, there would be a time when we were incurring losses of such a magnitude that it seemed only reasonable to lay off a lot of our employees. And everybody else in the industry except for Delta did that. Not us, he said. This was our opportunity to show how loyal we were to our employees. And so we kept them on the payroll. We found other things for them to do, but they never missed a paycheck. We believed in lifetime employment as long as they did their job, and we were able to demonstrate it. A different example of lifetime employment comes from the Woodward Governor Company. In Patterson's case, lifetime employment was made possible by the fact that Patterson knew there would be tough times, and so he set aside enough money to keep people on the payroll in the bad times. In the case of Woodward Governor, a different approach was tried. A little background on Woodward Governor and the Hall of Fame laureate who came up with the technique for lifetime employment we're going to talk about. Woodward Governor makes governors. These are the electronic and used to be mechanical components that make it possible for the engines of jet aircraft and ocean-going vessels to function. And the Hall of Fame laureate, whose story we want to tell here, was named Earl Martin. He got to the presidency of the company the hard way. He married the boss's daughter in 1920. Now his boss, Mr. Woodward, Elmer Woodward, wasn't about to let his son-in-law take over without proving himself, and so Earl here, who we're looking at, had to show that he could do every job in the business. He had to be a janitor. He had to be an on-the-road salesman. He had to show that he could work every machine in the factory. He had to be a bookkeeper. He had to do everything and do it well enough that his father-in-law felt he would make a worthy president. Finally, in 1929, Earl had passed the test. The father-in-law made him president. And at that point in the company's history, America entered the Great Depression. American industry stopped buying governors, and this company was headed for bankruptcy. Sales fell by 66%. What to do? Earl should have fired two-thirds of the workforce, as the business had fallen by two-thirds. But he couldn't bring himself to do this. It was a small company. He knew everybody. They'd become friends during the 10 years he was doing his apprenticeship. And so he called a meeting and let the employees decide. He said, "Gentlemen, here's the situation. We don't have money to pay all of you. We can do one of two things. I can let two-thirds of you off without pay and pay the remaining your current wage and salary, or we can all, including me, take a 66% pay cut." And then he had them vote on it. They voted to take the pay cut. So everybody kept their job, but at one-third their pay. That caused Earl to realize that he had an esprit de corps in the company that he could build upon to make this a truly family-oriented, family-feeling company. And so during the 1930s, as business slowly progressed, he instituted a number of policies which made this a family-friendly, almost a democratic company. But he was worried throughout the 30s about how to guarantee employment, because he realized that in the future, once again, they might have this problem of how to maintain pay for everybody. And by this time, he had become a very democratic manager, and he decided that helping him decide what kind of a program for lifetime employment to put in place should be done by the whole workforce. He organized them into committees, and those committees met, and they pondered over the issue. Earl, of course, had some ideas, and he fed them to them. And when all of these deliberations were over, here is what Earl came up with. He said, everybody employed by this company, plus the stockholders, will have a two-part pay scale. We will guarantee, in good times and bads, that every employee will get a subsistence wage, and so will the stockholders. But beyond that, we only pay more when the profitability of the company makes it possible. And so what happens every year? At the end of the year, you take your total revenue and you pull out the subsistence wage, and you have a huge sum of money left over in good years. And what do? You distribute that as a bonus, but a big bonus. And this idea of letting wages go up and down but guaranteeing full-time employment is a technique which was later applied by the Japanese and some other American companies. It's not customary in American business, but it is one way in which a business in a competitive industry, in a cyclical industry, can guarantee lifetime employment and earn the loyalty of its employees by being there when the chips are down, as Mr. Patterson would say. We had two other items on this list of moral responsibilities to the employee. But before we go to those, maybe one last word about Earl Martin would be appropriate. Looking at Earl Martin as we are here, we see behind him what looks like a framed diploma or document of some sort. That represents the Woodward Governor Constitution. Earl Martin wanted to run the company as an industrial democracy. He wanted all of the employees to feel like they were able to participate in decision making, and to codify that, he created for the company a constitution modeled along the Constitution of the United States. We're looking at one of the very few business leaders who made the democratic workplace one of his goals. Now let's turn to these last two moral obligations, and let's use Mr. Patterson, shown standing in front of a mural at his corporate headquarters at the time of his retirement. One of his topics, one of the moral obligations is happiness, day-to-day happiness. And self-actualization. With respect to the self-actualization, as indicated in this slide, Patterson's view was that you should try to provide jobs where the people feel self-actualized. Here's the way he put it. Insofar as possible, we try to satisfy personal needs on the job. We know that people want recognition for outstanding work performance, so he gives it. And we know that people want a sense of fulfillment in their work. And look at that last line there. We know that the man who's placed in a job he enjoys will do more than the job requires. So not only is it a moral imperative that you try to help people find happiness at work by finding fulfilling work, but if you do a good job, you're going to get greater productivity. A secret which is as good today as it was then. And happiness, the fourth of our topics, on a day-to-day basis, happiness on a day-to-day basis is also a moral responsibility. And Patterson had, I think, a very penetrating view on that. In building esprit de corps, he says in this slide, is not the big things, but the thousands of little things that count. You have to make every one of your people feel that he or she is an important part of the organization. And that means that in all of your daily communications, you should try to do what Patterson did. Help the person you're communicating with understand they are appreciated, how important their job is, and that, in your opinion, they're as important to the organization as you are. Well, let's take this analysis of fulfillment one more step. Our Hall of Fame laureates found fulfillment in business themselves. I think you can see that if you think about it in all of the stories I shared with you. I want to share with you one last story that shows fulfillment by a group of business leaders who were strong Christians and for whom practicing their religion in the workplace was important. The company I'm talking about is ServiceMaster. And because I'm tying it in with the practice of Christianity in the workplace, I want you to look at this slide right here, which tells us that back in the period 1979 to 1988, ServiceMaster was the most profitable service business in America. We're about to talk about a Christian business which was amazingly profitable, and I think when I finish you'll agree that maybe one of the reasons was their altruism. The founder of the company was Marion Wade, and Marion Wade started out in a very unethical fashion. Marion Wade sold pots and pans and later a rug cleaning product in the suburbs of Chicago. He would go door to door making cold calls, exaggerating how good his product was, overcharging the unsuspecting housewife. When he made a sale, he'd come back a day or two later and clean the carpet. He was making money, but he was a practicing Baptist, and we have to recognize the fact that he was not happy with himself. He felt he had to communicate in an unfair way, to lie. Let's face it, he was lying in order to get the sales away from his competitors. But he'd go to church on Wednesday and Sunday and feel terrible about what he was doing. One day, Wade was in a customer's house cleaning the carpet, and the chemicals he was using exploded. He woke up in the hospital. He had lost his sight. The doctor sent him home, telling him he would never see again. And so he lay at home in bed, feeling sorry for himself, going back over his life, and because he was Christian, praying a lot. But a lot of his praying was simply asking for forgiveness and promising that if he ever got his sight back, the Lord saw fit to give him his sight back, he would go out, and this time he would be an ethical Christian business person. Well, you know how these stories end up. He did miraculously get his sight back. He really did. And he went out and started doing business again, but this time in an ethical way. And surprising to him, by being honest in his communication and charging a fair price and giving more quality than the customer expected, he developed a reputation for being the person to call. And pretty soon he had so much business he had to hire other people. And soon he had this fleet of cars that you're looking at here with his employees wearing those fancy-looking smocks. And when he retired and he looked back on what was happening here and why he was building this business, he pointed to the fact that ethics was just good business, but more than that. He went to the fact that he found not only himself but his workers, who he recruited as being fellow Christians, and he tried to keep their eyes on the Christian aspect of their business. He made the observation, when you look at your business as a Christian calling, you find yourself putting more into it, giving a higher quality. As he put it, when you work for the Lord, you find yourself raising the level of your efforts. Your job becomes more than a job. It becomes a calling. Now, our example deals with Christians. The same could be said of any of the world's great religions. And even if you don't have a world's great religion as one of your guiding lights, as a great humanitarian, I think there's a message there. Well, this business was so successful that Wade decided to franchise it. He hired a fellow named Ken Wessner, who was screened first as being a good Christian, a devout Christian. And Wessner went around Ken Hansen. We're looking at Ken Hansen here. Ken Hansen went around the country selling these franchises, all of which followed this altruistic model that the company was determined to follow. And then it was determined that the company should begin to branch out and get into other lines of business that were labor intensive. They were basically dirty jobs, and where the company would have a competitive advantage because it had figured out the secret of motivating people with limited skills to do a great job at menial work. And so Ken Wessner, whom you're looking at, was brought into the business. Wessner's assignment soon led to the company going into the business of doing housekeeping for hospitals. That was done in 1962, and you can see that in 67 they went on into laundry and linen. You can see the other businesses. All of the businesses we're talking about here are dirty jobs. Hospitals were having a hard time getting them done right and maintaining morale, and Service Master's sales argument was, we know how to motivate the people so the job will be done better. And that's exactly what happened as they went into these hospitals. Now, one of the ways in which Service Master was able to motivate the people that did the cleaning is illustrated by this slide right here. It's the message that was communicated in the training sessions. Every hospital that signed Service Master up was a hospital where all of the employees had to attend training session. Not only the ones working for Service Master, but even the high-paid doctors, such as the fellow in the suit you're looking at here. And one of the important messages in those training sessions was that the cleaning person, this lady you're looking at on the left, had as important a role to play as the high-paid, highly skilled doctor, whom you're looking at on the right, in making sure that the operation was a total success, that the customer, whom you're looking at in the middle, healed totally and completely. and various statistical studies were presented to show that patients in a hospital that wasn't maintained in a sparkling, spick-and-span manner didn't seem to heal as well as those that weren't. The service master approach made believers out of that high-priced doctor you're looking at, and it motivated the relatively low-paid cleaning person you're looking at on the left, because she now realized that she was doing something very important. The service master people came up with a mission statement that you're looking at on the screen. Their first mission was to honor God in all that we do, they said. But their second message, still also part of what being a Christian is all about, was to help people develop. And there are marvelous stories of how they took these people with limited education and limited skills, trained them, gave them self-confidence, and helped them to move up into management careers, some with service masters, some elsewhere. To pursue excellence, this is a Christian mandate as they saw it, and to grow profitably. Without profit, none of the other things can be done. And so this is the way that the service master people conducted their business. Yes, they read the Bible at the beginning of every day in their management meetings, but then they went out and did these things which sound more orthodox, but actually can be seen to have a biblical origin. When they retired, Wade, Hansen, and Wessner were asked how they wanted to be remembered. Did they want to be remembered as great business role models? Did they want to be remembered as the authors of a brilliant business profit success story? No. What they wanted the world to remember was that they were three who had served. And so I hope you'll remember that orientation as one way in which altruism can find its way into business leadership. Well, we've talked now about two of the 6 groups of human beings that business leaders deal with, and we've talked about how the business leaders in the Hall of Fame develop policies to deal with them, with the customers and the employees. We didn't talk about the others on the group, or in the group. I would like to suggest that if you'd like to figure out what those policies might be, you turn to the 4-way test that we introduced early in the program and try to figure it out for yourself. As for me, I would like to leave you with the conclusion that ethics in business is not only possible at the level of fairness, it's possible at the level of altruism. It isn't easy, but it can be done. And sometimes that altruism can be the explanation of great business success. I'd like to leave you with the thought that in your own business career, you'll need a code of ethics of some sort, and this 4-way test we looked at a minute ago is one of the great ones to adopt. And I'd like to throw out the hope that not only will you be an ethical business person, but that some of you who view this tape will become so successful and be such good examples of ethical conduct in business that 50 years from now, the American National Business Hall of Fame will be coming around to college campuses presenting stories of business ethics, and your story will be one of them.